Hey everybody, and welcome back to Vestanland. This is episode 21, and in this episode, I'm taking a pretty big leap from what I've been working on so far in the series. As you saw in that opening shot, we're moving on to the mainland of Vestanland, the country, which is a pretty exciting thing. After 20 episodes of working on Nyrstad, I was kind of ready to mix things up a little bit and try something a little bit different. Don't worry, we'll get back to Nyrstad. There's a couple of more cool projects I'm looking forward to working on over there. But in the meantime, we're on the main island, and we're building a sort of a smaller city, really a town. You'll see I get basically the bulk of the town done in this one episode. There's a few other things that I'm gonna, I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on it, obviously, but yeah, I get a lot done in this one episode, which is cool. As you can see, I started off by running out the train line, and I placed down the soccer field there. Those are kind of the two projects that I sort of have to do once. So basically, the way the workflow is going to work for this part of the series. I built in this one episode. I built like the sort of main town center. Did a little bit of detailing, but not too much. And then in future episodes, I'm going to work on the train station and the stadium for the town, while also adding a little bit more detail to the areas I've already built. And within that, I'm also going to do some work detailing some of the farmland. I think having the farms kind of in the background of some of these shots, they look really good kind of as is, but I think they can be even better. So that's another thing that I'm excited to be working on. Just getting back to what I've actually done so far, you can see I've spent most of the time sort of laying out the roads, getting the networks sort of in place before I can start placing down buildings. I do a lot more of this than I even show on screen in terms of, I sort of refer to it as scaffolding almost. Just kind of getting a sense of where things are in scale, kind of zooming out, making sure everything is fitting together the way I want it to. That's super important. It's been important in all the builds so far, but it's particularly important in this small city here, especially since I want this to be like when you zoom out, you can see both this city and the larger city of Nyrstad, and they're pretty close to each other geographically. But I wanted to create a sense of like this is sort of a different region almost. It's like it's pretty far away from the big city. So yeah, getting the scale right was super important. You can see what I'm doing now is kind of doing work with the water, which, I mean, again, I've talked about this before, but if anyone has ever played the game of City Skylines, you'll know that working with water in this game is very, very frustrating at times. And this particular project was no different. Trying to mess around with the seawalls and the quays and the different assets to sort of tame the water. I'll talk about when I sort of work on it more later on, but obviously this town being sort of situated right on the river, that's obviously an important part of its history. So unfortunately, I did have to spend some time working with the water, which is never the most enjoyable part of building a city in this game. You can see it's a pretty distinct style of buildings that I'm placing down here in the kind of the town center. These are from a pack of buildings. I believe they're by Seabud, I'm pretty sure, on the workshop. And they're a pack of buildings inspired by Bern in Switzerland. I thought that was pretty appropriate for this build. It's kind of close to the mountains. It's kind of in this sort of, it looks kind of like an alpine valley a little bit. At least that's kind of what I was thinking when I was looking at it, looking at the map that I had built. So I think I sort of took some inspiration from a couple of towns in Switzerland and Austria, just kind of not necessarily building any of them like for like, but kind of getting just a sense of the style. And what I found with a lot of those towns is they kind of have these sort of rows of really densely packed buildings. A lot of them of this kind of the style that I'm using here, kind of along waterways or like in the middle of valleys, and very much like shaped by the geography. So that was something I tried to capture when I was sort of laying out this kind of town center region. You can see again, with sort of going back to what I was talking about, the scale of the city, you'll see I sort of have to step down the heights of the buildings kind of as we get away from the water. these buildings are pretty tall, like, in sort of the city skylines sense anyway. And yeah, I kind of have to step it down towards the sort of farmland again to get the sense that like this is a much smaller city. But yeah, that's something again that I'll get to a little bit later on as I'm building it. Right now, I'm kind of just splicing these buildings together, using Move It to get them right up next to each other, trying sort of not to make them completely straight, and trying to make sure that I vary the sort of roof lines and the colors a little bit, just to give the sense that this is a pretty old historic center. And yeah, there's been a lot of kind of wear and tear over the years that's made this look pretty interesting. You can see I'm kind of doing a little more work to define the riverbed here. I'll talk about this a little bit now, I guess. Sort of my thought process was I'm going to sort of create this town based on there being kind of like a some kind of like water dam type thing, maybe some kind of industry that used to be up here, and that's sort of why the town was built in this particular spot. But then like the dam is you'll see I'll build the structure of it later on, but it's no longer functioning, which honestly, in all honesty, is mainly an excuse for me to not have to try to manipulate the water as much, and try to. I was like originally going to try to have the two sides to be at different levels, and it was just not working. And I kind of just came up with a solution to kind of just get around that by saying that the dam that used to be there is no longer working, mainly because I couldn't get it to work at all in the first place. Yeah, so this one thing I'm doing now is I'm adding this tram line. I'm sort of thinking that this is sort of like I imagine this town is probably a hotspot for tourism. There's probably a lot of tourists kind of like sort of, walking around, just kind of hanging out. So I figured having this tram line, it's probably going to be useful for the residents, obviously. But the town is pretty small. It's not like, it's probably you can like walk everywhere because it's only a few blocks. But I decided to have that tram line kind of running from the train station kind of to what's going to end up being a stadium, and then kind of making a loop back around. That's something I'll get to in future episodes. I had to sort of flesh out some of the other projects that I want to do. I'll have that tram kind of just connecting them. And I'm sort of thinking that'll probably have I haven't figured out what the vehicles I'm going to use on it yet, but my guess is I'm going to try to use some kind of more historic style. It's sort of a little bit of a novelty, I guess, in this city, which still does not have a name. If you have any suggestions for a name for this place, leave them down in the comments. I was kind of thinking, this is obviously like, it's the same country as Nyrstad, and so it has some sort of, some Nordic, Scandinavian influences. Obviously, this is kind of, the architecture is more Alps inspired. But yeah, there should probably be some kind of backstory, maybe like the first person to like set up the town, maybe it's named after them. I don't know, something like that. Something along those lines would be cool. You can see I'm now extending the same style of buildings across the sort of like semi-main road. You can see I sort of glossed over it earlier, but I just used the vanilla 2-lane road and then used no controller to kind of make it a little bit narrower, just to get to work with the scale a little bit better. And this is what I was talking about earlier on in the video about stepping down the heights of the buildings, sort of from the core out into the countryside. I'm using this awesome pack of buildings by Lost Gecko. He has a traditional Belgian architecture collection on the Steam Workshop, and I believe all these buildings I'm using now are from that collection. They're super good. They're super detailed, and they have a lot of variety within them, which is great, because I want to be able to create an interesting streetscape that has a lot of variety within it. Now I'm adding a church. I'm imagining again like another historic building that's probably a hotspot for tourism. It also does a good job of kind of filling in that awkward, like really sharp angle that I created in the street grid. I'll go back in detail around that a little bit in this episode, which you'll see a little bit later. Right now I'm getting back to again filling out a little bit more of the town center up until this kind of second road. you can see sort of basically the way that you can see it on screen, but the town is kind of that the tallest buildings are right up against the river. I imagine those were at some point when this was like maybe it was farming or timber or something. There's probably a lot of trade happening up, right around along the river. And then as you get further away, the houses sort of spread out a little bit, and it's more just people like actual farmers living there, or just people living in the town, or what have you. That one of those buildings I placed down, I believe, is a theater. I think that's also a Swiss building, which kind of it's kind of appropriate for this city. Again, kind of Swiss inspired a little bit. So that was a cool thing to put down. There's probably some kind of historic significance to that building within the backstory of this town. Again, which it'll be nice to have a name for it at some point. I haven't thought of one, so I'm kind of hoping that someone else can think of a good one for me. But if not, I'll have to come up with something creative by myself. You can see I was sort of putting down a few fences. Again, I don't want to spend a ton of time detailing those like backyard areas that are never going to be, people are never really going to see those. What I will do, I don't really do it in this episode, but I'm thinking it'll probably be the focus of a future episode, is I'm going to spend a lot of time detailing kind of this waterfront area and some of the streets of this town in a way that I wasn't really able to do in Nyrstad, or really, I should say, really haven't been able to do in Nyrstad just because of the scale of the city. Whereas this is kind of a different setup. It's a much smaller, it's a small town. I have sort of the freedom a little bit to put a lot more detail in, use a lot more props, and stuff like that. So that'll be exciting. Again, that'll be sort of more a focus of future episodes. This episode, as I mentioned at the outset, is really just about getting the town center done and complete, and kind of getting the network set up so I can add in a few really important projects a little bit down the line. You can see I was adding, I was using PO to like create a little bit of a bigger building on the corner there. That probably had some former industrial significance. There's the theater again that I was mentioning. I like how it kind of blends into the historic town. And again, it's probably been there a long time. It probably has like, I'm imagining, I don't really know. I mean, this is true in America. There's like a lot of times small towns like this will have sort of like one like claim to fame. Maybe that theater is like what this town is known for. It's been there a long time, and it's like historically people have come from the city to like go to shows there or something like that. I don't know. Kind of just thinking of that on the fly. Now I'm getting back to the church, as I mentioned. I do a little bit of detail there a little bit later on. Before I do that, this is the kind of dam structure that I was talking about. I found this asset on the Steam Workshop. I believe I think it's Dutch. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure exactly how it works, but, or I should say I do know how it works, but like, I don't know how it works in real life. But I sort of just like the look of it. I kind of found a few similar looking things in some of the towns that I was getting inspiration from. But this particular asset was a little bit too wide for the river, so I just turned it to PO, and then I was going to try to like shrink it down, but then I didn't want to distort the textures too much, so I created this little like building out of Armesto's like modular like building pack here. I imagine this was probably just kind of like an administrative building at some point. Maybe it was just like part of the like structure of the dam. I don't really know. I don't know much about it, or in terms of like how this a building like this would function in real life, so I'm kind of just making it up as I go along. This is a little bit of the detailing that I was mentioning earlier, just adding a few stone walls and stuff like that, just kind of, again, to kind of like cement this place as sort of like its own thing, and then kind of later on I'll be able to go back and add a lot of life to it by adding props and stuff. But I wanted to get sort of main structure of it down first before I could add some of the stories that I want to add to it. I'm using just the ploppable pavement and some of these surfaces to kind of clean up some of the clipping, and then kind of just bringing the trees in a little bit closer. What I was sort of thinking is this dam is probably like, I'm not sure why it was, maybe it was built for just water for the town originally, but the town is kind of sprung up around it, and then the river turns a little bit more natural following the dam. This river is again, this probably should be a name for the river as well. I can't say that I thought of one, so Again, if anyone has any ideas on that front, feel free to leave them down below. But yeah, the rivers, they'll sort of have a couple of towns, at least in my sort of grand plan is to have a few towns and smaller cities kind of scattered throughout the kind of the countryside of the main island, kind of leading up to the major city, which we sort of already built most of. But yeah, that's kind of getting ahead of myself. I should probably talk a little bit more about what I'm doing in this episode before getting on to some of the other ones. This is an example of sort of the more intensive detailing that I'm going to be able to do in the next few episodes of the series. Just adding adding a little cemetery to the church, adding a few kind of big trees, and then adding a few flowers around the edge, just to kind of add some color, add some interest, and kind of cement this as like a historic gathering place for the people of the town. Again, this is something, it's sort of like in Nyrstad, the buildings are so dense, it kind of doesn't really need much detail, just because, like, you know, it's like you don't necessarily see the streetscape because the buildings are kind of packed close together. Whereas in this situation, obviously there's like kind of the dense core of the town, but there's a lot more open space, there's a lot more room to add things like bushes and flowers that'll make a difference when you're kind of just looking at the city, which I'm excited to work with. I think that'll be an interesting change of pace, and you can see I'm adding a ton of flowers to this little park here. Again, this is probably a popular spot for people to walk around and hang out, just kind of a gathering place. And in terms of just for my own enjoyment looking at the city, just having a kind of pop of color right in the middle of it is pretty cool. Having these great assets that have such good textures and good colors in them also makes that process a lot easier, it has to be said. I won't talk about it too much just because I have so much already, but again, using intersection marking tool to add some crossings, some pretty basic detailing there. And then again, like I was saying earlier, adding some trees and fences to the backyards of those village buildings. Again, not focusing on the backyard detailing as much, just because it's a little bit out of sight and probably not where the detail will be best appreciated. This is another instance of me just kind of stretching out some roads, getting a sense of scale, adding a few of these paths just to kind of mark off where I want to build things later on. I don't really show it on screen, I guess, but I do a lot of zooming in and out just to get a sense of where things are and a sense of scale, like I mentioned earlier. This little area, I'm building this little intersection on screen, but that building right here is, I'm thinking this is a school, or at least that's what the asset is. I'm using it as a school, I should say. I'm going to add a little bit of a soccer ground here, where the kids probably play, and again the stadium, which eventually we'll be building, is just a couple of blocks down the road. So that's kind of a cool contrast there. Yeah, I'm imagining the school was probably like really old. Maybe it's like a boarding school or a prep school or something. And maybe it like is one of the oldest buildings in the town, and the town has kind of grown up and kind of pushed up against it over the years. You can see I placed on that really modern looking apartment building there. I thought that was an interesting contrast. When I was looking at Google Earth, I was kind of surprised to see a lot of these towns had kind of some really modern looking buildings, clearly built like really recently. I thought that was an interesting contrast with the really historic kind of old town center buildings. So yeah, I thought that was something that was interesting to include. This is another little area. This is like an example of sort of starting the transition out to the countryside, adding these more spaced out buildings with some pretty extensive gardens and their own fences and stuff like that. I think down the line, this will serve as a really good transition to some of the farms and the countryside houses that I'll be building a little bit further out. But yeah, adding these garden bushes by Fidelmo were recently released on the workshop, and yeah, I got a chance to use them like right away. And I think they look really great. They do a great job of, again, adding some color, even if maybe it's not the most like realistic to have so many of those back there. I still think it looks pretty cool. And then with these houses, I'm using some, a few other sort of flowery bushes. Maybe those are like fruit trees or something. I don't really know. But yeah, I'm trying to I'm always been conscious of kind of the historic significance of these areas. You saw me, it was kind of like a small detail, but like placing those kind of younger trees along the tram line, maybe signifying that's kind of like a new development that's kind of been, maybe it's been like, remodeled or whatever by the town more recently, as opposed to kind of the really old looking kind of farmhouse type buildings with their gardens and the big trees around them that have probably been there for hundreds of years. This is kind of the last thing I do in the episode, just kind of I put this little bridge down just to kind of shore things up, make it look a little bit more complete before moving on to the next episode, which I think it'll probably be at the train station. I want people to be able to get between here and Nyrstad. But that'll be cool to see trains coming in and out. So that's probably what the next episode will focus on. I haven't gotten to it quite yet. But yeah, I'm getting close to the end of the episode today. So I want to thank you again for watching. Check me out on Instagram and Discord at the links in the description. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm excited for this new chapter of the Vestanland series, and I hope to see you guys in another video. Bye.